What is not a bullet you dodged, but a huge tactical nuke that you dodged? Story 1. In the university, me and my two best friends were drinking, playing Mario Kart, and just shooting the crap. We were hungry and wanted food. I said, let's just make a tombstone pizza because we've been drinking and most delivery services were now closed at 1:30 a.m. One said he's fine to drive, and I said, no, that's a bad idea. He got the other guy to go with. McDonald's usually doesn't take 2 hours to get there, so eventually I went for a scooter ride since McDonald's was less than 2 miles away. I noticed there's a taped-off spot on the bridge right before McDonald's with a crane, cops, and an ambulance. They curbed the car and drove it off the bridge and into the shallow creek top first and died on impact. I dodged the nuke of death but ate the bullet of survivor's guilt for nearly 5 years. Story 2. I had some chest pains one night and woke up to my wife to tell her. She got a little scared that it might be a heart attack, and we agreed that I should go to the ER. The nurses were pretty sure that it was a false alarm, but wanted to run an EKG as is common practice. Now in my head, I was hoping that the chest pain would come back, not to prove a heart attack, but so that they could find out what the chest pain was. The EKG was done by one veteran nurse and a new nurse. I was watching over their shoulders. Something was flashing on the screen that made both nurses look at each other with disbelief. They ran it again, and one nurse went out to the station for help. The other stayed with me and very nicely told my wife and daughter to go back to the waiting room. A few seconds later, 5 to 6 more people came into the room slowly and calmly and began preparing me for something. It turns out that I was having a second heart attack that night in the ER. The doctors and nurses found an obstruction in my heart and were preparing to have it cleared and a stent put in place. When I got out of surgery, the doctor who placed the stent told me, "You probably picked the best time and place to have a heart attack, right there in the ER." Well, I guess it's good to know that when it comes to having a heart attack, you can't really pick a more convenient location than an ER, because talk about great timing. You managed to have your heart attack right when you were surrounded by a team of expert medical professionals. It's almost like you planned it that way. Couldn't have planned it any better myself, but I guess maybe take the heart attack portion out next time. Story 3. When I was 16, I had a good friend whose father was a wealthy businessman of some kind. Now, this was Chicago, and I guess his dad started screwing around with the wrong guy's woman. My friend told me it had something to do with the mob or a mobster's wife. I never knew for sure, but do know that I saw firsthand his dad get threatened, at a tennis court of all places, by two well-dressed, clearly Italian men who drove up in a black Cadillac. I was just sitting there with his friend as they talked to him, and it was exactly as I would imagined it would have been in the movies. My friend also told me that there was a contract on his dad. He actually said that it was like cool, and at the time I thought that it was too. I was invited to go with him on a fishing trip in Lake Michigan that week, my friend, his dad's friend, and I, and 2 weeks before the fishing trip something happened with a member of the family, and we had to go to Cincinnati for a few days. When I returned, I learned that my friend's body was found floating in Lake Michigan. He was wearing a life vest. His father, his father's friend, and the boat were never found. Police questioned me about what I knew or who I'd seen talking to his dad, but I think I was lucky that I said that I couldn't describe what they looked like and didn't get wildly specific. Either way, the coolest kid I knew, Chris, was dead. And they never found his dad, the dad's friend, or the boat. It was a nice boat on a calm day on Lake Michigan. And something bad happened. I always felt that I dodged getting caught up in something I probably wouldn't have escaped from. Story 4. We went to Thailand in 2003 for Christmas. I spent a number of years there in the early 90s as a kid, and loved it so much that we were going to do it again the next year. Spend Christmas watching the sun come up on the beach of Phuket again. We had the tickets and everything, and because of some new fallout from an Enron-adjacent scandal, my dad wasn't allowed to leave the country. He wasn't implicated, but he was in the C-suite of a credit card company, and all such people were under travel advisory. Anyway, the very hotel that we were going to stay at got 100% destroyed by the tsunami, so I guess we got pretty lucky. Story 5. Back in 2004, when I was only 20 years old, I was on a road trip with my friend and her dog from California to Washington. It was on I-5 North at around 1 a.m., using my cruise control to keep my speed at 75 miles per hour. The speed limit is 70. I'd gotten speeding tickets in that part of Northern California before, and I was familiar with this drive because my boyfriend was in LA and I lived in Seattle. So I made that trip a few times a year for a few years. All that is to say, I had learned my lesson and used cruise control to keep myself from speeding, never going more than 5 over the posted speed limit. So it's pitch black, early morning, and my friend has her seat reclined all the way, taking a nap on the passenger seat, and her dog is on her chest. I see what I assume to be lights from a cruiser coming up behind me. The car slowly pulls alongside me and matches my speed exactly. I kept my eyes straight ahead because I knew this person was staring at me. I wasn't panicking though, not like I had in the past when I encountered a cop on I-5, because I knew that I wasn't really speeding. I kept glancing at the speedometer to assure myself that I was good. I may have even slowed down a notch or two to be certain. After what felt like an eternity of this cruiser just keeping pace with me, he finally slows down, swerves in behind me, and puts his lights on. As I'm slowing down and pulling off to the shoulder, I nudge my friend awake and tell her that I'm getting pulled over. She asked if I was speeding. She knew my history, and I assured her I was not and had been using cruise control. I was really starting to shake by this point. Cops make people nervous, but something just didn't feel right about this stop. I knew there was no reason for him to pull me over. Pitch black in the middle of nowhere, hadn't seen a gas station or rest area for miles. The guy strolls up to the passenger side of my car as my friend is using the lever to get her seat upright again. When he finally gets to the passenger side window, he looks visibly surprised that I have a passenger. He begins to fumble over his words, claiming that I was doing 90. He was so damn flustered that he forgot to ask for my license. I actually asked him if he needed it. Then he trots back to his car, and my friend and I look at each other like, what? Her dog, by the way, was going absolutely crazy during this entire interaction. I never saw that dog act like that before or after this happened. Now remember, I'd gotten a few tickets on that same stretch of road within that same year or two. I was very familiar with this process and knew how long it would take and what to expect. In my previous experience, most cops go back to their cruisers for a good 6 to 8 minutes. This guy came back after only 2 minutes, kind of tossed my license and registration into my friend's lap like he was annoyed, and yelled at me to slow down and told me that he'd just give me a verbal warning for now. I thanked him, despite how creepy it was, and while I was putting my license in my wallet and my registration back in my glove compartment, he fired up his cruiser and floored it back onto the highway. This was also not normal. Anytime I've been pulled over, they would always tell me to pull out ahead of them so that they could make sure I merged carefully back into the freeway. My friend and I were freaked. She was more freaked out than me. I think I was trying to explain it away, give him the benefit of the doubt at first, but the longer I thought about it, the more uncomfortable I became. I couldn't shake that nasty feeling that something wasn't quite right. Now fast forward many years later, and I remember hearing about some bad cop that they had arrested. He'd been trolling I-5 North in Northern California. During that same time period, I'd been on road trips, stopping unsuspecting young single female motorists and assaulting them in his cruiser. His MO was to pull up alongside of their cars, scan to make sure that they were single females, and then pull them over in desolate areas at early morning hours. He ended up murdering one of those girls when she put up too much of a fight. I can't remember his name, and I don't know what he looked like. It was too dark to see his face well. But my blood turned cold when I heard that. Definitely dodged a huge nuclear life-changing, possibly life-ending event thanks to my tired friend and her protective little dog. Wow. Well, that's scary, and that's a reminder to always trust your gut. And your friend's dog, apparently. Talk about a lucky break. You really did dodge a bullet, or a baton, as it were. All in all, though, that's just really scary and really horrible that a cop would do that. Because it sounds like that cop was a real highway hazard and pretty much an evil dude. So, good thing that you didn't become one of his victims. Story 6. My father-in-law was working on construction of a power plant and was scheduled to work Sunday, was a union pipe fitter. Saturday, he got a call from another company asking him to run a job much closer to his house. I think like a 5-minute commute versus a 50. So he accepted and didn't go to the power plant job Sunday. That day, there was an explosion at the plant, and people in the crew that he was working with wound up getting killed. Story 7. 24 years old, had a pesky sore on my tongue that was really bothering me. My boyfriend's dad was a dentist, so I went over at his house one night and asked him to take a look. He recommended that I go see an oral surgeon the next day for him to check it out. The next day, I decided I was feeling better, so I tried to cancel my appointment, but my boyfriend's dad insisted that I go. I went, and the oral surgeon pretty much diagnosed it as cancer on the spot. It was aggressive, and by the time of my surgery to remove it, it had already spread to multiple lymph nodes. They ended up removing over half my tongue, followed by chemo and radiation. Given how aggressive it was, I often think that if I had put off the doctor's visit any longer, I probably wouldn't have survived. I'm coming up on my 10-year anniversary in January. Story 8. I was moving abroad to do a post-grad degree. My flight was to leave Newark early in the morning on September 11th. A family friend who worked in the towers kept prodding me to move my flight to the afternoon and come visit him in the office so that he could show me around. My parents were pressuring me to go as well since it was a good networking opportunity. I was on the fence but decided not to since I was a poor student and didn't want to pay the cab fare from my hotel in New Jersey to Lower Manhattan. Our friend made it out, thankfully, and I'm guessing that I would have done well, but no way would I want that experience burned into my memory. Story 9. I was briefly engaged to a man who has since cheated on his gorgeous, intelligent, sweet wife hundreds of times. They are separated but have 2 children and will likely reconcile. I broke our engagement off when he said that he thought it was perfectly okay for a man to cheat on his wife if they'd been married for a while and he'd gotten bored. Oddly enough, he didn't believe a woman was entitled to do the same. I feel so badly for this poor wife now. He began cheating on her 2 years into their marriage when she was pregnant with their first child. Sounds like this guy has a PhD in justifying bad behavior. It's a good thing you dodged that bullet and let this poor other wife deal with his shenanigans. And I know it still sucks for her, but better that person than you. Ideally, he just ends up lonely and single at the end of all this, but I guess time will tell. Story 10. Nuke dodge number 1. Ex had some kind of breakdown, and I woke up with her standing over me with a butcher knife. She is in some sort of catatonic state. I didn't move. I don't think that she saw that I was awake. Then she left the room for a while, came back into our bedroom without the butcher knife, got in bed, snuggled me until it was time to get up. Then she made some great waffles for breakfast, as cheerful as ever. Didn't get stabbed, but still have some trouble sleeping unless I'm alone in the room. Nuke dodge number 2. Another ex cheated on me. She wanted a baby. We both did, by the way. So she ended up getting married to the dude that she cheated on me with. They had a baby, then she cheated on him, and they got divorced. So, wife's boyfriend is paying the child support. Life is good. Story 11. I met a girl one summer and she fell head over heels for me. She even ditched her fiancé for me. But when she went back home at the end of the summer, they got back together and got married. I saw her again the following summer and she wanted to pick up where she left off, and I said no. I ran into her years later. She told me all about her adult life and how her husband could no longer satisfy her, so she was hooking up with random strangers from the internet while he slept in the spare room. They had 2 kids by that time, and I felt so sorry for them. Story 12. I interviewed at a company in New Hampshire that made jams, baking mixes, lollipops, etc. for a technical job. The president, the owner's daughter, spent most of the interview dumping on their current consultant and making fun of all things, his degrees. That initially turned me off. And then, speaking with the owner, he makes it a point to take a call and tell the person on the other end, "I'll pay you when I pay you." Cash flow issues much? His question about my education was, "What can your fancy degree do for me?" Then, when I met the VP of marketing, he asked me how many recalls I've done. None. That's not what I do. Wait, what? What interview is this? I declined their offer. Fast forward maybe 5 years, I'm talking to a guy about doing some consulting work for him, and we got into the subject of this company. He had interviewed there as well. He also got the vibe and declined. It turns out they were planning on selling the company and were beefing it up for appearances. It also turns out after the sale that they had spent the previous month sending current clients to their next endeavor. They almost went to jail for their financial and business shenanigans, and I would not have been happy to be caught up in that mess. Sounds like you dodged a real bullet there, because who knows what kind of trouble you would have gotten into if you had accepted their offer. It's always important to trust your gut and not ignore any red flags during the interview process. And now you can feel even better knowing that you made the right decision. Looks like their company culture was about as appealing as a jar of expired jam. Story 13. Walking to work in the winter, halfway through a step forward under a sky bridge when an icicle taller than me, 6 feet tall, and probably 2 feet around at the base, crashes down right in front of my nose. If my bus had been a half second earlier, if I had walked even a tiny bit faster, I would have been impaled from brains to balls. I was frozen in place for a minute, quietly surveying my near-death experience. There was another pedestrian nearby who witnessed it, and his wide-eyed, amazed look on his face as he stared at me confirmed just how narrowly fortunate I was that day. Story 14. My manager was trying to have me fired for underperformance, and I was so depressed at the time that I believed I was an awful employee. The place I work at has a whole song and dance routine just to get someone a verbal warning, let alone getting fired, so she tried to get me to take a severance payment so that I'd leave and save her the trouble. Now, I had to take sick leave shortly after that conversation, and while I was gone, she initiated the formal process to have me fired. I was able to drag things out for a couple more months, and during that time, I discovered that she'd falsified documents to make me look like a lost cause. Presenting a dossier to HR demonstrating her statements were provatably misleading and documenting every time that she failed to follow proper procedures turned everything around. I got moved to a better job, on a better team, and spent a solid year rubbing it in her face how well I was doing, and ensuring that I got back to her whenever I got praise from the department head. It was pretty annoying that she didn't get fired for that, but there would be too much blowback on management if she had. Still, I went from the verge of unemployment to unequivocal success. Wow, talk about turning the tables. It's amazing how sometimes the very people who try to get us down end up being the ones who are exposed for their own wrongdoing. It sounds like you showed a lot of resilience and determination in the face of adversity and came out on top. And the fact that you were able to rub your success in your former manager's face just adds an extra layer of satisfaction to the whole situation. Kudos to you for standing up for yourself and proving your worth.